April, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you for how beautiful your office looks.
Thank you.
Can you tell us where we are? And
Mhm.
so that's the first question. And also, how did you get here? I know that's a big question.
We are currently at Sanford University and specifically in the Sanford Cares
Mhm.
suite in my office in that suite. And Sanford Cares includes counseling, care, and wellness
Mm. Mhm.
offices. And all of those offices exist to support and serve students to help them thrive and
Mm.
remain successful in and beyond the
Mhm.
classroom.
Mhm.
How did I end up here? Well, I'm actually a Sanford alum,
Mhm.
so I was here as a student from 89 to 93,
Okay.
religion major.
Okay.
And when I graduated, I left Sanford and worked in some churches, did campus ministry,
Mhm.
got a master's of theological studies from Duke,
Mm.
worked at First Baptist Asheville for a while,
Mhm.
and then got a call from Sanford wanting me to come and interview for the director of student ministries position,
Mm.
which was a wonderful and shocking call because for me, um, the first really and only female mentor in ministry I had was my campus minister while I was at
Mm.
Sanford, my junior and senior year. And
Uh-huh.
so they were actually calling me to, you know, come and interview to be her successor.
Mm.
So in 2000, the summer of 2000, I came and started as director of student ministries.
Mhm.
And for the first 18 years of my tenure at Sanford, I was basically a campus pastor, preaching,
Wow.
teaching, leading small groups, pastoral
Uh-huh.
counseling, missions. It was a really great run. I was a part of an incredible team
Uh-huh.
of ministers in that office. And then about, I guess, 6 years ago now, I had an opportunity to step into my current role, which is Assistant Vice President for Student Development and Support.
Okay.
And so the same um, division, Student Affairs, and I also was able to take the pastoral work of caring for students with me when I left the spiritual life office.
Uh-huh.
Um, I was able to continue building and developing this vision I had for Sanford Cares.
Mm.
So that didn't exist
Mm.
until a few years ago. Um, but I just felt very strongly in my role as a campus pastor that we should be figuring out how to, as an institution and an organization, to respond more thoughtfully
Mm.
and thoroughly to concerns
Uh-huh.
and crises
Mm.
and difficulties that students in our community were experiencing. And what I observed is that there were a lot of caring people in our community, but we were leaning too heavily on their ability to see and know
Mm.
every concern.
Uh-huh.
So, over the last 10 years, I've been able to be a part of this really beautiful um, cultivation and blooming of this idea of Sanford Cares.
Mhm.
And we have a stronger, broader counseling department now than we've ever
Mm.
had. We have a dedicated full time care coordinator
Mm.
who is like a case manager and meets with students who are experiencing stress or
Uh-huh.
difficulty. And now we just added a wellness coordinator who, was our missing piece of
Mm.
doing more proactive programming, events, and providing resources to really promote overall wellness and well being for students. And I would not have anticipated this is the turn that my calling and pastoral role would have taken,
Mhm.
but it sort of makes perfect sense,
Mm.
in hindsight, that this is where I would land
Uh-huh.
because I work with a very different population of students now than I did when I was simply a campus pastor,
Mhm.
but I'm more often in touch with the students who are really in hard, dark, difficult spots.
Mm.
And it's a joy to be able to enter into those places with them and speak hope
Mhm.
into their reality and over their experience and try to help them map
Mm.
their way
Yeah.
towards lighter, days.
Mhm.
So Yeah, that's how I wound up here.
Mm.
I've been in this role, I think it's been about 6 years now. And just last year, we moved into this really gorgeous space. And so
Okay.
I had the chance to
It still looks new.
design it. Yeah, design it. And we have 29 pieces of our original artwork. That was
Mm.
really important to me that
Mhm.
we get to, that we got to, create the space and the ambiance here
Mhm.
so that when people step into the St. Bricure suite, they exhale.
Mm.
I love watching people enter in,
Uh-huh.
and often they look around and you can just see them
I love
relax.
that.
So,
Man. I love the
Mm,
thoughtfulness and I
mm,
love the integration that I'm hearing.
mm.
It sounds like there's a holistic approach to
Yes. Hmm.
pastoring and ministering and trying to meet the needs
Hmm.
of those that have
Yeah.
needs. I love
Hmm.
that. Has that always been your approach to ministry? Like what
Mm.
what has brought this holistic approach and this integrated approach into fruition or fruition, excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah.
My words.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that's developed over time as
Okay.
all of our sort of philosophies of ministry, take root, and we prune them over
Yeah.
time.
Uh-huh.
And um, some things served me and the people that I was serving well, and others didn't.
Mm.
And I always prayed for the grace to let go of ideas or ideals about church or ministry
Mm.
or God or
Uh-huh.
spirituality, the grace to let go of those things so
Wow.
they didn't become impediments,
Yeah.
or sort of plaque that would prevent the flow of God's
Mm.
spirit and
Uh-huh.
love, through the arteries of service and ministry.
Yeah.
So I would say I've arrived at this place, and though I might not be able to map it out
Yeah.
exactly, where all the stops I made along the way, but I think being a female
Mm.
and I met Jesus at the age of just about 13.
Mm-hmm.
I was not raised in the church. So I sort of stumbled into a church in my neighborhood at the invitation of a neighbor. And when I met Jesus, when I heard that story, I truly fell in love
Mm.
and was raptured.
Mm-hmm.
My heart was all in immediately, and um, I really I really fell in love with God, fell in love with the church,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't long. I mean, maybe 4 years later that I felt a call to ministry,
Mm-hmm.
but it was the church that introduced me to Jesus introduced me to a version
Mm-hmm.
of Jesus
Yeah.
that was pretty oppressive
Mm.
at looking back.
Uh-huh.
So I low key freaked them out at
Of
17 when
course.
I walked the aisle and say I had a call on my
Mm.
life to ministry.
Uh-huh.
So their response was to immediately start giving me books about female missionaries who were
Mm.
single and gone to other countries
Mm-hmm.
and served until they died. And I just cried
Mm.
every time. I mean, I was inspired and in awe of these women, but I didn't feel a camaraderie or a call
Yeah.
to emulate the
Mm.
choices that they had made.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so when I came to Sanford, I met professors and some people in the community that continue to affirm gifts of preaching and teaching and pastoral ministry, in ways that gave me enough courage to keep considering
Mm.
how God might be calling me.
Uh-huh.
Because back in the late 80s, early 90s in Baptist life, which is where my faith took
Uh-huh.
root,
Yeah.
women could serve, but only to a certain level.
Uh-huh.
So I had to work through a lot of that. And so ultimately, I did 2 years of campus ministry at Appalachian State with the Baptist Student Union.
Mm.
And at that time, the Baptist campus ministry staff throughout the state were pretty progressive.
Mm.
They were incredibly affirming of my gifts
Mm.
and opened my mind and my eyes to some different possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up going to Duke Divinity School
Mm-hmm.
after that, which was another kind of
I would
liberation
love to
for
hear more
me.
about that because I don't know many people that've been to Duke. So
It was
that's
amazing.
yeah.
So I think the equilibrium of my faith just started was adjusted and
Mm.
recalibrated bit by bit, and I began to put a lot more weight in the idea of figuring out how to love as many people as big as possible,
Yeah.
as often as
Mm.
possible, over getting the law right
Yeah.
and applying scripture to church polity or
Mm.
to church discipline or whatever. What those things are, I can say there's value and
Yeah.
importance in those, but there was a shift in me.
Mm.
There was a shift in me. And I think just being a female called to ministry in a context that wasn't necessarily celebrating that idea,
Mm-hmm.
that that pushed me towards I have to figure this out. I have to figure out how to put these pieces together.
Mm.
And what I saw is that a lot of people were really confident about a part of scripture.
Uh-huh.
And and their theology or their practice of faith really hinged on being right.
Mm.
And I saw that as inhibiting my ability to be faithful to my
Mm.
call, the way that was being communicated.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, well, that can't be right,
Yeah.
because I knew what I knew, that I had been crafted and gifted in specific ways,
Mm-hmm.
and that I felt most faithful and most synchronized and in harmony
Mm.
with the Spirit of God when I was walking out that call and living out of those skills and gifts. So I just leaned into that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that led me more and more and more to a place of arms wide open,
Mm-hmm.
humility,
Yeah.
um, and saying it's the whole is always greater than the part.
Yeah.
And if you're tripping up over the part,
Mm.
then
Yeah.
maybe step back and try to see the whole.
Yeah. Mm.
And that's been really effective in working with students too, and say, yeah, this part of your life is very hard right now. It's
Mm-hmm.
very difficult. It seems impossible, but it's just a part.
Yeah. Mm.
It's just a part. And it's an important part. It's a hard part. But let's try to look at the whole.
Mm-hmm. And that's a message for me today.
Ah!
As I'm wrapping up my studies, have my final exam today, and I'm just walking away like, huh, I think I did well. But every time I get into this season where I'm taking exams and have papers to write, all I can see is the exam and the paper, and I reconsider everything about my life. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
it's a stressful place to be.
Yeah.
And
Well, it's really unfortunate, quite honestly. Our sort of traditional educational system and
yeah,
our mode, of measuring and judging with the way that we grade isn't the way. I don't think it's the way that God operates,
Mhm.
and so it is counter spiritual for us, I think, at times to be
Yeah.
like, you want to be mentored and shaped
Yeah.
and taught, but I do think that exams and grades, which I know that's so crazy, I'm saying that, and I'm part of the
Yeah.
educational
Uh-huh.
institution, but
Yep.
there's value here, and I
Yeah.
think we can do it well.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is about equipping students
Mhm.
to empower students to say, you have the power. Like, the power is yours to say, I'm a student, not to pass. I'm a student to learn.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
I'm a student not just to graduate. I'm a student to grow,
Yeah.
and try to help them reframe their experience and not to just be focused on passing,
Yeah.
but really helping them take ownership over the maturation and
Uh-huh.
growth
Wow.
that God has planned for them when they, come into this
That's definitely
place.
the difference between my undergraduate experience
Yeah.
and my graduate experience. Like undergrad, I was just trying to get through,
Ah.
give me the grade, let me plow through so I can get into ministry. But taking my time with grad school, so okay, no, I'm actually wanting to learn. I'm excited to learn, and not just that, I've been taught how to learn.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it took me being 25, 26 to really know how to be a student.
Yeah.
Even though I went through all these different levels of education. So yeah, I love that you say that we do have the power, and we are empowered to contribute to the conversations about our education. And
Well, and isn't that what discipleship really is? At the end of the day, it's about taking on the posture of a student. no matter how old or
Yeah.
how experienced you are, to believe that there's always something else to
That's right.
learn. And to say that we are disciples, whether we are 6 or 60,
Mm.
there's a common posture between every stage and
Yeah.
age of our life with Christ. And to communicate that with, with students while they're here
Mm.
as and identifying as a student,
Mm-hmm.
and saying this is really a posture you're going to want to
Yeah.
take into your marriages,
Mm.
into your
Mm-hmm.
parenthood, into your professional life, because the minute that you think that you are not at least in part a student who has something to learn,
Mm.
then you absolutely become
That's
enslaved
right.
to pride or
Mm.
fear
Mm.
and it really disconnects us and separates us from, I think from the presence
Yeah.
and purpose of God in the world. And
Mm-hmm.
so to help students become aware of or conscious of, oh, yes, I am a student
Mm-hmm.
in a particular way right now, but I
Yeah.
want to I want to be a lifelong learner.
Yeah. Mm. I love that. So teaching students to be students, right? And
Yes,
to
yes.
carry that posture into
Yeah,
past graduation,
yeah,
past passing this class,
yeah.
moving it. I love
Yeah,
that.
I will say it's not a temporary assignment.
Yeah.
Like it is a permanent identity.
Mm.
Um, I mean, just today was having an exchange with my husband, and um, we were just saying out loud, reaffirming kind of the importance of continuing to learn
Mm.
how to love and help each
Yeah.
other. You don't you don't just figure that out
Yeah,
and then
that's
you're
right.
done.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter because you're always changing. So
Yeah. In every
yeah.
relationship too,
Mm-hmm.
man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you're spending a lot of time with students. And so I think when I talk about what I do as a youth
Mm-hmm.
pastor, youth minister, I think people ask a lot of questions or they say stuff like, that's a really hard thing to do because of the way that, things are changing among our youth.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm very optimistic about what I'm seeing. And I'm hopeful about what I'm seeing as I engage with teenagers and young adults. What are your thoughts? As you work with these students, are you seeing some beautiful things take place as far as like hope for the future? And I know there's struggles that are maybe could be new,
Mm-hmm.
but
Oh, sure.
and maybe we
Yeah.
can talk about that too.
Yeah. Hmm. I do work with students a lot and a lot of different kinds of students, quite honestly. I think there's a misnomer that Sanford students are of a particular
Mm,
profile,
uh-huh.
but there's actually quite a bit of socioeconomic and diversity here.
Mm-hmm.
Students come from a lot of different backgrounds. We fall short in diversity in some categories
Yeah.
and are really strong in others.
Yeah.
So but there is quite a variety of students and what they're bringing
Mm-hmm.
to the community. But overall, I do think that there are upward trends in heightened mental health struggles.
Uh-huh.
Part of that is because there is more permission to speak openly
Yeah.
about it,
Yeah.
which is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And to seek help has less stigma than
Yeah.
it's had in the
That's right.
past. I do think that what I've observed in being here for 24 years and working with students, I think there's been some major shifts in the church.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's not as much education
Mm-hmm.
and training in the church as there was 15 years
Uh-huh.
ago.
Huh.
That's a generalization.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Used to be a lot of churches there was an emphasis on Sunday school or
Uh-huh.
church
That's
training
right.
or, and I think some of that has just kind of fallen off, and there's been a little bit more focus on events and large gatherings, and I call them spiritual pep rallies.
Mm.
And not in a derogatory way,
Uh-huh.
but to try to infuse energy,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
and excitement into the spiritual life. But I think what I've seen in students is that over time, like the first 5, 7 years that I was here in spiritual life, students were arriving with certain baseline of biblical knowledge and theological agility, to think and talk about God. Politically, there was less polarization at that time, and so there was more common ground naturally for students to talk and interact. Over time, I just think I've seen a decline in biblical literacy. Students at best are reading Jesus Calling, a couple of verses a day and, a half a page. They don't generally know how to really study the Bible. They struggle with that. And it's difficult. Many of them haven't been taught how to think theologically through a thought. Oh, well, if I say this about God, then how does that break down? Or how does that stand the test of time? And I think there's just a lot of cultural practice, maybe going to church or posting a verse in their Instagram bio or Snap, but I think there's just been this disconnect, and I see that in a lot of ways. I see that in their spirituality, their sexuality, like their just overall understanding of integrity. There's this disconnect. I can't help but trace that right back to the phone being in the hand all the time, and social media in particular, like how we've been given all these outlets and opportunities to just put thoughts, ideas, feelings out there, and it's not a reciprocal, relational. Now, it can be reciprocal because people can, comment back, dislike, whatever, but it's not as relational. There's a disconnect there, because there's more distance. If you're doing it digitally, there's just more distance than like you and I sitting here having this conversation. So that's my amateur kind of assessment of the observations that I've had. But I will say this: I don't feel I'm not dismal, about I don't think it's a dismal outlook, or I'm not discouraged, because I also see these strengths in these students, and I think a lot of that is on us, the older generation, to come alongside and say, "Hey, I noticed this. Are you interested in this? Like, has anyone ever talked to you about it?" Like, we need to be initiating conversations.
And I would say we have to be open as well.
And 100%.
Yeah, we have to be open to understanding that there's something that we can
learn from them,
right?
For us to be students as well.
Right.
And that's why I say initiate conversations and not initiate a lecture. To say this is how you ought to be doing it, or this is what you should be doing, but instead to say, hey, maybe these are some deficiencies that you may not even be aware of that are costing you. And what do you see in me? Like, where do you see the deficiencies in my talk and walk around spiritual things? I think they have a lot to offer. And they're very quick, they're resilient, and they're generally, I think the students I'm working with are often better at seeing what is actually the more important thing. And they're a lot of the students that I work with maybe aren't as bothered by some of the details that have so bothered their parents.
I would love to hear more about that. Tell me more.
I just think they enter conversations about social issues differently. And you'll hear a student go, well, what's the big deal about that? What's the big deal about women in ministry? Or what's the big deal about the bathrooms? I think that they do have an ability to discern the importance of things.
These are great observations, and I think I've witnessed some of these too. I mean, I'm working with younger people usually, but also there's just well, at least in this space that I'm in, they're thinking more about their faith, and they're asking different questions.
Yeah, they're not just like, pour me a cup,
Yeah,
like
exactly. And they're
yeah.
asking some difficult questions,
Mm-hmm.
and some questions that some questions I've never asked before.
Mm,
You know, I wonder, maybe it's just part of that, just the
mm-hmm.
receiving of information, right? It's like I'm being exposed to ideas that maybe my parents would never be exposed to, just
Mm-hmm.
because of the lapse, or the lack of internet access, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
So that has me thinking too. But yeah, that's just interesting what you're saying
Mm-hmm.
about what can we still receive,
Yeah.
even in light
Mm-hmm.
of the phone that's taken such a precedence over
Yeah.
all of our lives, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
true. It's
man.
true. And it can be a good thing.
Yeah,
That's what I, tell my children, my students, is the thing in itself is not good or evil.
yeah.
It's our relationship to it.
Hmm.
And that's true about a lot of things,
That's right.
not just a device.
That's right. Man. So going back to your integrated and like holistic approach to
Mm-hmm.
ministry and pastoral work, I'm interested to know your articulation of the good news,
Oh, okay.
right? Because I've talked about this on this channel before,
Yeah.
but I think that is influential in how
Mhm.
you pursue ministry
Yeah.
and view a lot of things.
Yeah. Evangelion. I remember the first time that, well, I don't know if it was the first time. I have a distinct memory of a professor talking about the Greek word and emphasizing that it was the good news. I think I more often had heard in my early years of spiritual formation in the church, just heard the gospel.
Mhm.
This is the gospel of Christ.
Yeah.
And this is the plan of salvation, was a huge
Yeah.
phrase. And that's what I heard most often.
Mm.
These
And-
are the 4 spiritual laws. This
Yeah.
is the
Huh.
plan of salvation. This is the sinner's prayer. Like in the church and the spiritual culture that I entered into and was sort of raised in my junior high and high school years, that was the focus. There were pamphlets, there were
Uh-huh.
steps, and so it was about converting others.
Yeah.
You want to tell people about this. I mean, it was the age of the judgment houses. That's when all that
Wait,
started.
Judgment House. I never heard about that.
You're kidding.
No, what's the Judgment
You
House?
got to find one of these.
Okay.
As a youth minister, because I started out in youth ministry, and as a youth minister, I remember thinking, okay, we did one of these, or we went to one of these when I was in youth. I've got to find one to take my youth to, so that we can deconstruct it.
Mm.
So when I was a youth, we heard about a judgment house in Montgomery. And so our youth minister loaded us up and we went. And it basically was, you kind of walk in and you go in all these different rooms, and there's a room where kids are, getting ready to go to, let's say, prom,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody's really excited. And then there's a room where maybe there's a bunch of those kids are in church and they're like at a youth group meeting.
Uh-huh.
Then they're at the prom and there's drinking involved always.
Uh-huh.
And then there's a car accident. Okay. There's always a car accident. It was brutal. So then you get into a room where you're, it's basically a heaven and a hell room. So you go into hell, and then there's the person in the car wreck who didn't know Jesus, and that's their destiny.
Uh-huh.
And then you're in the room that's heaven. It's cool, and the angels are there, and one of them is there, and the question becomes, well, where is so and so? Where is so and so? And the basically the idea is, well, they're not here because you didn't tell them about Jesus, and you sort of let them. A lot of judgment.
Wow.
There was a lot of judgment in the judgment house.
Uh-huh.
And so that was a lot of, that was a lot of the philosophy, approach, strategy to try to mobilize the youth of the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
It was very fear driven.
Uh-huh.
And it was that idea of, if you don't tell them, who will?
Mm.
And it's on you.
Yeah.
I remember that last.
That's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure. I can still see that kid's face in that last room of the judgment room. He's like, in hell, and he's like screaming out to this, girl in the white robe being like, why didn't you tell me? And you're like leaving going, who do I need to find and share the plan of salvation with? So I think I was raised and formed, quite honestly. And I hook, line, and sinker, let's do this. And so let's get people converted. When I became a Christian at 12, my parents were not in church. My mom started coming to church pretty quickly. And within 6 months was like the church hostess and has never stepped away from the church or her faith since then. My dad would come if I was singing a solo or giving my testimony. They didn't call it preaching, but I would write him long letters, 3-4 page letters, laying out the plan of salvation, begging him to turn to Jesus, to come to church, and that was, I felt a lot of responsibility. And I was an only child for 13 years. My brother wasn't born until I was 13. So being an only child, the oldest child in a home with alcoholism, the spiritual stuff just caught fire. Like it just, went up in a big flame. I mean, I was on fire for Jesus. I mean, I really was convinced he's going to be the answer. I believe the billboard. He's going to be the answer to everything. So that was a big part of my early formation. So when I finally found my way into the tutelage of some professors and teachers and mentors who talked more about the good news, it was incredibly freeing and refreshing. And I was very drawn to that idea. I think for a long time, the good news for me by a lot of well-meaning people had been reduced to a plan for sin management and fire insurance. And I was ignited in a much deeper way when I began thinking and talking about the gospel as good news. And when you talk to someone about Jesus, it should sound like good news and not a threat, So I would say that is now, pretty important to me, is to say, when people look at my life, I would hope that whatever they hear me saying or observe me doing is evidence that God is good, that he's not angry, he's not punitive, he's not keeping score, he's not waiting for us to mess up, but that God is really very good. And the good news is that he calls us good and has good plans for us and good provisions for us, good promises. So when I look around in the world, the thing that probably makes me the saddest is to see God being represented as anything other than good.
I agree. Man. And that's what gets me excited about conversations like these, because people get to know, I think, who I believe the biblical God is, who I believe the God that Jesus has come to show us is. Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know where this other God came from, but the good news is freeing, right? And not just that, based on what you said earlier about this integration that you're representing here, God cares about all parts of me, and maybe the good news has something to say about all parts of me, not just what happens after I die. Something that deals with this right now reality.
Yeah. That may have been that same professor, or definitely one in that era, also introduced to me the idea that eternal life starts now.
Yeah.
That part of what the good news says is that heaven isn't like on layaway.
Yeah.
It's you have access to it now,
Uh-huh.
and you're bringing the kingdom of God to earth
That's
now,
right.
and you're walking in
Uh-huh.
eternity now.
Yeah.
Like eternity begins the moment you acknowledge it and become an eternal, and are an eternal being.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is part of the good news.
Mm-hmm.
It's not you just got to suffer through,
That's
today
right.
and just hope
Yeah.
for heaven. No, no, the good news is that God does not force us to wait
Mm.
to experience peace
Mm.
and healing.
Mm-hmm. Is at hand. Like
Mm-hmm.
God is at hand, and the
Mm-hmm.
kingdom of God
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
at hand.
Yeah,
Mm.
agreed.
Mm. Beautiful. So, what's getting you excited about life these days?
Well, we just sold our house
Okay.
in Vestavia, which the sad part is it's like a mile from the church, and so that's been wonderful.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But it was time.
Mm-hmm.
Our little birds have left the nest now, and we've had a dream of living on the water for a
Mm.
long
Mm-hmm.
time because water um, is medicinal
Mm-hmm.
for me. So we bought a property on Logan Martin, which is about 50 miles from here, and are about to become commuters. We've never been that
Mm.
before,
Uh-huh.
but we are so energized about creating a new haven
Mm.
on earth
Mm-hmm.
for friends and family
Mm.
to come and rest and
Mm-hmm.
play, be replenished,
Mm-hmm.
maybe, re-energized for
Mm.
to step back into their lives,
Mm.
to bring good,
Mm.
to
Mm-hmm.
the world. So we used our house in Vestavia in that spirit as much as we could
Yeah.
in service to the church or to the university, and to just be a gathering place for people
Mm-hmm.
to talk and laugh, and to
Mm-hmm.
rest, to feel safe and seen and loved.
Mm-hmm.
And we noticed the last couple of years with the girls moving out that some of that opportunity is diminished, and even the energy had waned. And we were thought, well, maybe it's time.
Mm.
Like maybe this is, the time for us to go ahead and look for the next place that
Uh-huh.
we're supposed to do this.
Mm.
So we found it. And so will be moving later this month
Okay.
and beginning the resurrection
Mm.
project is what I call it,
uh-huh.
because we have purchased a beautiful property,
Uh-huh.
a house with very good bones,
Mm.
but not an ounce of flesh worth salvaging.
Mm.
So
Man, sounds like a lot of work.
it will be, but it's going to be worth it. It's
Mm.
going to be worth it.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I love that you're wanting to create this space, and you're thinking about how people can be blessed by it
Mm-hmm.
and be healed by it.
Yes.
I want to know more about like your ideas behind environment, because I think
Mm-hmm.
environment is a big deal too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an
Yes.
environment guy. I even feel that way about my office. I want the lighting
Yes.
in my office to be intentional, so people come in my office, they feel
Yeah.
like they can breathe.
Yeah.
And so I feel like
Yeah.
DF is mindful of that as well.
Yeah.
Our
Me too.
community is mindful
Yeah.
of that. So can you tell me more about your thinking? Are you an artist, and is that influencing
I
that too?
am. I'm a creative.
Okay. Uh-huh.
I'm a
Yeah.
creative. I have lots of ideas, and I do create things. But one of the things I like to create is atmosphere and
Mm.
experience.
Mm. That
So
makes
I
sense.
will, I enjoy planning worship
Mm.
because I like to weave the elements
Mm.
together
Mm-hmm.
and for it to be a
Yeah.
cohesive
Mm.
experience.
Mm-hmm.
I like to host dinners or parties and to celebrate
Yeah.
and elevate,
Mm-hmm.
others. Um, Even in this, when we were designing this space, I requested to be a part of the conversation, the very first conversation until the last.
Mm-hmm.
And so in these offices, there are only can lights. They can
Mm.
be dimmed
Uh-huh.
and brightened. Again, I asked to be in charge of every piece of art,
Mm.
and talked with our counselors and staff, and just said, this may be unconventional, but because students are going to be in these spaces, and this is where the work is happening. Like, I need for us to all be on the same page
Yeah.
about, the spaces that we're creating. I do think that everything matters, and it doesn't have to be expensive. Um, I have cobbled together quaint and cozy from things I found on the side of the road for a long time. But I think there's just something about being thoughtful in what you're putting into a space. And even when we were picking out these chairs, knowing they would be used for therapy, we wanted them to feel like they were in embrace, so that they had a tall back and wide seat and arms, so that
I do feel like I'm getting hugged.
there you go. See?
Yeah.
So we just thought about those things, like, how is another person going to experience the space when they enter it? And I think it's good to think about that in terms of our physical presence as well. Like, when someone enters into a space that I'm inhabiting, are they going to feel like a bother to me, or are they going to try to shrink and be small, or are they going to feel completely comfortable and at ease approaching me or making their needs known? Or I too am really impacted by my environment. I'm an extroverted feeler, and so I immediately assess my environment, and if my environment isn't in order or inviting, then I find I have difficulty internally thinking, focusing, functioning.
Yeah.
So, but I think that's biblical. I think that there is an integration of mind, body, and soul.
That's
and
right.
that's why it talks about love the Lord your God with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength, because all of that works together, and we weren't created to compartmentalize or to live a detached life from our thoughts or the walls that are around us. So it takes a lot of effort, I think, to detach or separate from environmental factors that are disruptive or deficient. And when we can create an external space that helps people be at ease and lively, I think really even better things can happen internally.
And I love that line. You said everything matters. So that's going to be a quotable for me after this conversation, and my prayer that I can remember that everything matters. That's real good, because we just moved, so our new space is more appealing, and we already feel the difference. Like, we're excited to go home. You know what I mean?
Yes.
There was a time where we were not excited to go back to our apartment. So it does play a role, and you do feel.
Well, there was, even when we were going to buy the house in Vestavia, I had some hesitancy. I think I maybe had been on a mission trip recently, and I felt some guilt. Like, should we be buying a house that's 3,000 square feet? Like, I know we feel cramped in 1,100 square feet, but, in another country, not just 5 people would live in this space, but 15 people would live in this space. And I really struggled to say, am I being indulgent? Am I being unfaithful? And I just kept coming back to the creation story about how God, as creator, intentionally made things beautiful and said, this is good. And it was not, it wasn't just functional.
Yeah, I mean, look at nature.
I know,
Oh,
right?
my
Yeah,
goodness.
exactly.
The diversity within nature.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. And then even thinking through, the Gospels about really the command to bring heaven to earth. It isn't, hey, gather everybody up and get their spiritual passport stamped so that they can get into heaven when the time comes. Like, no, you're to be bringing it to heaven to earth now.
That's right.
In every conversation, every interaction, every physical space, every relational space. And I thought, okay, we're going to buy this house, and we are going to approach it as if we are creating heaven. for people. When they walk in, it feels like heaven for them because of the way it smells or
Yeah.
how comfortable the bed is,
Yeah.
or, you know, the fact that they get fed or they get a chance to share their thoughts or, so I think that with that charge upon us to bring heaven to earth, that includes beauty. I think it includes beautiful surroundings.
Are you a Hauerwas fan, Stanley
Oh, yes, he
Hauerwas?
was one of my favorite professors at Duke. Yes.
You had him as a
Oh,
professor?
yes.
Ah!
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Man, okay, because I was just thinking about the peaceful
Yes.
kingdom
Oh,
or the
yes.
alternative community. Like this is what that sounds like to me. Like
Yeah.
to be a healing space.
Yeah. Oh,
That-
he
I think that's
affected me.
Who else did you have at Duke?
I had Gregory Jones and Willie Jennings was probably one of my favorites. He actually, is he dean now? I have a hard time keeping up, but he became dean at one point. But he was a theology professor, and I will never forget we were reading all these books about the Trinity and heavy theological stuff, and then our exam questions would be things like, you're a pastor at a church and a 6-year-old comes to you after the service and says, I'm confused. You say that God is our Father, but then sometimes you talk about Jesus, and today you ask the Holy Spirit to come. Like, how does that work? And so you basically had, as our exam, we had to answer that question appropriately to a 6-year-old.
Wow.
We had to translate all the theology books and
I love that.
exegesis we had done into a conversation with a 6-year-old. He was notorious for having one or two questions like that on his exams. Priscilla Pope Levison was there. She was, an amazing professor. She and her husband Jack are at, I think they're at Azusa Pacific now. Who else did I have? Stanley. We used to call him the Andy Griffith of the Divinity School. Mickey Eford was my Greek professor, published in Richard Hayes.
Richard Hayes. I know Richard Hayes.
Yeah.
He has a book coming out this fall that I'm excited about.
Yeah. Oh, Will Willimon.
Okay.
Will Willimon. He's. I think Will's in Alabama now.
Okay.
Or he was, but he was like dean of the chapel for a long time, and yeah.
Wow, that's
It was
very
good times.
I mean, I just turned in a book yesterday about Stanley Hauerwas. He wrote a commentary on the book of Matthew. I used for papers.
Do you have his Prayers Plainly Spoken book?
I do not.
It's a really lovely book just for, there are times in my spiritual journey where I've just sort of run out of words. And so it's helpful to have other people's prayers and I'll just read them sometimes.
Yeah.
And Stanley wrote prayers for our class and read them before every class.
Wow.
And so Prayers Plainly Spoken is a collection of class prayers.
Okay. Well, I've been really into reading other prayers as well. I got this big book of collected prayers that I've been reading. So
well, you should look at his
get that too.
Yes, Prayers
I love that.
Plainly Spoken.
I definitely could check that out. So if people wanted to continue this conversation with you, how could they access you? Do you have any work online or any? Are you a writer?
I write a lot of notes to people and cards to people.
Yeah.
I do write. A lot of people tell me I'm a writer, but I've never been willing to become betrothed to a blog or any sort of social media outlet like writing. But who knows what's yet to be?
Yeah.
But I would say probably just giving me a call or an email. I'm easy to find on St. Bird's website. You can.
I might share your email.
And you can share my email in the comments or whatever. Yeah. ALRobbins at stbird.edu. Yeah.
I sure can.
I'm happy to do that.
Well, you have so much to offer. And I really appreciate being in this space. Got Love Does by Bob Goff on the table there.
Yes.
I know you got some good books in here. I know it.
Yes.
So
I've been blessed to read a lot of great books and meet a lot of the authors over the years. And yeah.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for this conversation.
Oh, thank you for being interested in conversing with me.
Yeah.
It's been great for me too.
Yeah, thank you so much for the work that you're doing here too. I know it's beneficial and I know it's a blessing to the students, and you're contributing to the future of the church and the present of the church as well. But I appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah. Same.
I would like to thank you so much for listening to this conversation with me in April. It was a blessing to me, and my prayer is that it was a blessing to you as well. If you would like to continue this conversation with April, I would encourage you to send her an email at alrobbins@samford.edu. And that is spelled like ALROBINS at SAMFORD.edu. And further, if you would like to support the work on this channel, an easy way to do that is by streaming my music on music platforms. I have music on Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube, Deezer, and SoundCloud. And you can search that music up by typing in my name, Wesley Hargon. And that would be a simple way to support this work on this channel just by listening to my music. I would like to end this conversation and this episode by reading from Prayers Plainly Spoken, written by Stanley Hauerwas. This is the book that was referenced in this conversation with April, and she was kind enough to let me borrow this book. And the prayer I would like to read is called Worthy Agents of Your Peace. And the prayer is as follows. Saving God, free us from hardness of heart. Take from us all pride and pretension. Strip us clean of all that makes us incapable of being witnesses of your gentle love. Make us worthy agents of your peace, so that even as we contend with one another, the world may say, but see how they love one another. Amen.
Life is really good. Why would I complain? Life is really good. Even with the rain, even with the pain, I count it all gain. 'Cause though I want the same, everything will change. And that is okay. Praying every day that I can stay along the way. Keeping my heart open so love can freely reign. Keeping my mind open so I can stay sane. It's so deep, I'm just swimming in gratitude. So even if you hate, I can't really stay mad at you. I'm here to serve, not to give you an attitude. And staying grounded, no matter my altitude. 'Cause life is really good. Why would I complain? Life is really good. Even with the rain, even with the pain, I count it all gain. 'Cause though I want the same, everything will change. Put a smile on your face, everything will be okay. You will see a brighter day. Try to have some faith. Try to have some faith.